Hello everyone, today we are going to be talking about winter garden planning. I want to give you some few tips and tricks on effectively planning for a successful winter garden. So I was actually recording this video earlier. I recorded a good section of it and it turns out that my audio was not working. One thing I was talking about in the video is the oak leaf hydrangea, and I would consider that a great success in this garden this year. That shrub has been in its place for 4 seasons right now, and this past winter it sustained some severe winter damage and it lost all of its blooms. But I love this shrub so much. This season it put on so much growth, and the foliage on it looks super healthy and it looks absolutely gorgeous, and it even tried to put on some blooms. And because it has sustained some winter damage, what I'm going to do this season is I'm going to provide it with some winter protection. Last season we had minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, and that killed a lot of its growth. And if you don't know, oak leaf hydrangeas bloom on old wood. That means second year wood. So you do not want to prune your oak leaf hydrangeas in the fall. So because all that second year growth died back, it was not able to bloom for me. But because that growth that it put on started in the early summer, it was able to produce a couple blooms on it, but they did not fully mature because they just did not have enough time. And I think the reason why I was able to put on those blooms is because we had an unseasonably warm fall, and that allowed it to put on a little bit more growth and a little bit of blooms, but they did not grow to their full potential. They did not grow to the structure that they should grow to or the color that they should grow to, but at least it tried, so I'll give it that. And what I'm going to do this season is I'm actually going to get a frost cover and wrap the oak leaf hydrangea with a frost cover, but I don't want to do it while it still has foliage on it. And actually Erin from the Impatient Gardener does that to her hydrangeas, and she wraps them in the winter to provide them with winter protection. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this oak leaf hydrangea. But the reason why you don't want to wrap it before it drops its leaves is, one, because you want to enjoy the leaf color, especially on the oak leaf hydrangea, because it has gorgeous leaf color, and second, because you are going to end up with mold and rot on that shrub, because all that foliage has a lot of moisture in it and you don't want to trap all that moisture. Now the frost covers are breathable, but that is still going to trap a lot more moisture than if you did not have anything on the shrub. I also want to talk a little bit about the successes and the improvements that we have done this year. So one of the things that I was able to finish this year is the butterfly garden, and I finally mulched it, and I also planted a lot of plants in there. And the second thing that we accomplished this season is the front flower bed, and I expanded that flower bed. I gave it a new look, and I also mulched the whole bed, and that is a great success for me because it is a huge task and I did not think that I was going to be able to accomplish it. Another great thing that we did this year is we also planted a whole hedge of the Spartan junipers, and I planted 17 of those Spartan junipers, and they look absolutely gorgeous. And also the arbs that are behind them, those are our neighbors' arbs. They look magnificent with them, and I think the layering is going to be very beautiful. So I can't wait for these to put on some more growth and fill up a little bit. And we can't talk about the successes without talking about the challenges. So this year, one of my biggest challenges was weeds. Weeds galore. And the reason for that is because I always bite more than I can chew. Also because this spring was crazy busy for us. There was just a lot going on, so I was not able to be in the garden and weed like I should have. But I finally discovered that what works best for me in the garden is to have a schedule, a sort of a strict set schedule, and that's kind of what gets me going. forces me to go out there and work at the problem. I had tons of weeds in the vegetable garden. So what I did for myself is by setting the schedule, I would go in the morning to work on the vegetable garden, at least weed one bed, and I would give myself a specific amount of time, and in that time I have to weed. That's the only thing I have to do in the vegetable garden, and anything else has to be done at a separate allotted time. So I was able to work on 2 projects because I set myself a schedule. And while I was weeding, I was also able to work on the mulching. So super early morning, I would wake up and I would work on weeding the vegetable garden, and on lunch break, I would work on mulching the flower bed. And that's how I was able to accomplish mulching that giant flower bed in 2 weeks, and also accomplishing a whole lot of weeding in the vegetable garden. By setting myself a schedule, a strict schedule, I was able to accomplish that, because I am the type of person that gets distracted very easily. So I have to focus on one area at a time. What was happening to me before that is I was jumping around from one location to another. I would work a little bit here, a little bit there, and I wasn't able to accomplish anything. So I figured that really the best thing to do is to focus on one area at a time and give it an allotted schedule and an allotted time. And if you struggle with the same thing, that's what my advice to you. A very important thing to know when you are planning your winter garden is your winter climate. And for us here in Zone 5B, our temperatures go down to -20 Fahrenheit or -15, but last year they did end up going to -20. Now that is not the usual. Usually it doesn't go that low, and it's more mild than this, but the average temperatures in the day are in the 30s or 20s, and sometimes in the teens. But usually in the 30s and 20s. And at night, it dips down a lot below that. So these are things you want to consider when you are planning for your winter garden, and consider the plants that you are choosing for this reason, for the temperatures that you get, and also for the amount of rain and snow that you get. So for us over here where we live, we get about 45 inches of rain on average per year, and also about 54 inches of snow on average per year. And that's going to kind of help you understand how much water you should be giving your plants, and if you should be planting certain plants because maybe they might receive too much water and they would just die because of all the water that they are receiving. So maybe choosing plants that are more tolerable of water is better if you are in a wet climate like I am. And if you are in a dry climate, choose things that are going to be more tolerable of drought conditions. So that you have to pay attention to your area, but because not all zone 5s are the same. Another important thing to know about planning your winter garden is your frost dates, because during the winter, of course, we gardeners are always planning for the next season, and we're always planting seeds and planning on the bulbs that we want to plant. Maybe we have planted already, and also planning on the next plants we are going to be buying for next season, or seeding from seed. So these are things that we do during the winter, and because of that, it's very important to know when is your first frost date and last frost date. And for the first frost date, it's going to help you understand when to take your seedlings outdoor and start hardening them off for the spring season. And for your last frost date, it's also going to help you understand when you should stop planting. Now, for me, I kind of continue planting as long as I can dig a hole in the ground, but there are certain plants that are going to not be as tolerable of those conditions, the cold conditions, when you are planting later in the season. And the advice is to plant for fall planting 6 weeks before your last frost date. I don't always follow it. I have planted a lot of things after that date and even after the frost, and things still do okay. But if you are maybe in a much colder climate than I am, these are things that you want to consider. Also, what your first frost date is going to help you understand is when to start your seeds, because there are certain things that might take a lot of time to grow, like for example lisianthus. I'm also going to be growing some lavender this season from seed, so that's going to require a lot of time to grow indoors before I can plant it outside. So I will probably be starting that in the late winter in order for it to put on a lot of growth before it's ready to be planted outside. Also, when you are planning your garden, try to plan and plant things that are already winter hardy. You don't have to plant the things that are going to be a struggle for you. Now, we all do it. All of us gardeners love to have the things that we cannot have, and we always try to grow things that we cannot grow in our climate, and that is a fun challenge. But you can't plan your entire garden based on things that you cannot grow in your climate. It's a lot easier and a lot more sustainable to grow things that are hardy in your area. And when you are considering hardy, also consider the wet conditions or drought conditions in your climate, not only the cold hardiness, but also is it drought tolerant? Is it a plant that likes boggy soil? For example, one of the plants that I have in the cottage garden behind me is the hardy hibiscus, and I planted it there because that is a plant that loves to be in wet conditions. It's a bog plant. Other plants that I have in there are the cranberries, and these are the Stephen cranberries, and those plants love the wet conditions as well. And I planted them in that location for that reason. And these are cold hardy plants that can survive our zone. And when you are planting something that is not cold hardy, a lot of times you are forced to dig it out and take it indoors. So you want to consider the space that it's going to take indoors, the light, maybe the heat that it's going to require, whatever it is that it's going to be a resource on you indoors in order to keep it alive. And you want to minimize the amount of those plants that you have to bring indoors, because that's just going to be a lot of work to have to dig up a lot of plants or take them in pots indoors in order to keep them alive. Also, there are a lot of plants that provide beautiful winter structure in the winter season. So when you are planning your winter garden, always plan for things that will provide you with beautiful winter structure. Some of those plants are, of course, the evergreens, such as boxwoods, and I have a euonymus that has a beautiful evergreen color, and the evergreen trees. We have a mugo pine and a huge evergreen tree that I'm still trying to figure out what it is. I have some rhododendrons and azalea that also have beautiful evergreen colors. But other than evergreen, there are also beautiful trees, like our maple tree has a beautiful structure to it, and plants that have a beautiful bark to them. Maybe it's in the color, maybe it's in the peeling of the bark, whatever it may. Now, our garden is still in the development stage. I still have a lot of plants to add in here. I would consider this a very, very new garden, maybe 2 years old at maximum. And that is because a lot of these beds that I have over here are new. I worked a lot on getting them to where they are, but I don't have a lot of plants in them. And that is the next stage for this garden, is to plan for the plants. And some of those plants, like perennials, for example, would be your sedum, your echinacea. Those are going to provide you with beautiful structure in the garden. And these are perennials. And also you can have some grasses that have beautiful evergreen structure. Now, for us, the grasses tend to topple in the snow because we do get a lot of snow. But if in your area you have some grasses that are have hardy stems to them, or kind of strong stems, then you can have those as winter structure in your garden if you don't get a lot of snow like we do. Or I should say, if you don't get a lot of heavy snow. Also, something that you should plan for in the early fall and even in the summer is bulbs. So you want to start ordering your bulbs in the summer, and you want to plant them in the fall. And in planting your bulbs in the fall, you are going to end up with beautiful blooms in the spring. So you have to plan for these things ahead of time in order to have the structure and the blooms that you want in the early spring, because our zone is cold and there's not a lot happening in the early spring. So by planting these bulbs such as daffodils and tulips and crocus and these things, you are going to have beautiful color in the early spring, considering that all the perennials are still dormant and the annuals are not ready to be planted outside. One of the things that I did this fall in preparation for the spring is to plant a couple containers with some spring blooming bulbs, and I think I can't wait for them to bloom next season, and I think those are going to look absolutely gorgeous and provide us with tons of color next spring, because our springs tend to be a little bit on the short side and comes from winter, 2 weeks of spring, and then summer. We don't really have that long of a spring. So because of that, I don't want to plant spring containers because they will cost a lot and they won't live for that long. So by planting spring bulbs, I'm going to get a lot more out of them than if I were to plant a spring container. Also, the spring bulbs, I could just easily dig them after they're done and plant them where I want them to be for the next season. Another thing that we have sort of touched on is winterizing plants. What winterizing means is simply just preparing them for the winter that is coming. I'm going to put my hands in my pockets because it's getting cold. I'm going to winterize my hands. It's dipping down into the 30s. So I touched already on that with the oak leaf hydrangea, and that is something that you can do for your shrubs that are tend to be a little bit on the tender side. And if you end up with a harsh winter, you want to make sure that you are going to be getting some blooms on your shrub. It's not that the shrub is going to die, but you want to preserve those blooms that you will be getting the next season. And the oak leaf hydrangea is something that I have to kind of baby because of the harsh winters that we might get. Another thing that you want to think about when you are winterizing is if you have any bulbs that need to be dug out and stored indoors because they cannot handle the cold weather, you want to do that. Also, if you have dahlias or if you have any trees that you had outside during the summer season, you want to bring those indoors as well. I have my Chicago hardy fig tree. I will be bringing that indoors very soon because it has lost its leaves. Well, by indoors I mean in the garage. I will winter it in the garage. I have been keeping it in the garage for several years now, and I am super happy with it. It's doing absolutely amazing. Those are some things that you can do if you have an unheated garage, or you could also put some of your bulbs and such in your basement, the bulbs that need some warmth. And you can store them in the proper storage way, maybe in paper bags or such. I am winterizing some geraniums. I have them in paper bags and boxes, and I am storing them in the garage to keep them for the next season. And when next season comes, I will be planting them outdoors, maybe in the ground or maybe in pots. I think they are going to be going in the ground. Also, some of the things that you want to be working on right now in order to prepare your garden for the winter is mulching. It is really important to mulch, and unfortunately I don't have enough mulch for all the areas that I need the mulch for. But mulching is going to protect that surface of the soil, and it's going to keep the soil temperatures regulated. It's also going to protect the bacteria and the insects that are living in the soil, that are the beneficial insects. It has great benefits to it. It's also a moisture level regulator. It's going to regulate the moisture in your soil. It has tons of benefits, and one of the benefits that it has, of course, is weed prevention. So when you mulch in the fall, you don't have to worry about it in the spring and kind of rush when all the weeds are popping up in the spring, because where we live over here, it is super wet in the spring usually, unless we have a drought. But even with a drought for our area, we still get rain in a drought. Even in a drought for our area, we still get tons of weeds. So by mulching in the fall, you are preventing those weeds from popping up in the spring, and you don't have to worry about weeding that much. One of the things that I have to work on mulching is in the vegetable garden. That's an area that I'm still trying to figure out what medium I want to use in the raised beds in order to mulch my vegetable beds so that I don't have tons of weeds. Now in the past I did use landscape fabric to cover the beds in the spring so that when I am not ready to plant them yet, the weeds would not pop out. I might do that again just to cover them, and then when I'm ready to plant, I pull out those landscaping fabric. I pull out the landscaping fabric and I start planting. And the purpose of the landscaping fabric is to simply protect the soil and to stop the weeds. It's not going to be as effective, of course, as adding mulch, because it doesn't have the benefits of the mulch. It doesn't have the soil regulation, temperature regulation, and moisture regulation, and all the breakdown that the mulch does and adds the organic matter. Another thing that you need to pay attention to during this time is maybe adding some organic matter to your beds, especially in my vegetable beds. I'm focusing on doing that, and I'm adding lots of organic matter in my vegetable beds, and I have a very specific method that I do and have developed over the years, and that is in-ground composting. And I try to do that for all my beds, and I rotate them over the years because I can't possibly do it for all the beds in every single year. So I try to give them a rotation. Also, you can add compost during this season, and that is going to break down and help feed your soil. And by the time spring comes, that compost would have nourished your soil, and your plants would be super happy, and they are going to thank you. Also, any plants that you are going to be planting in there, they're going to love it, because the compost takes time to change the chemistry of the soil and change it and kind of apply its nutrients into the soil. So by putting it in the fall, you are going to be adding tons of nutrients. One of the things that you can add also is cow manure. That's going to also add great benefits to your soil. So these are things you want to think about now when you are planning your winter garden for a happy, blooming, thriving spring. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is to have a winter checklist. So during the winter season, it is a season of rest, but also there are certain things that we just ignore during the gardening season, and that is taking care of our tools, maybe organizing our seeds. Like my seeds right now used to be organized. Now I have to reorganize them again, because the seeds that I pulled out, I just kind of left them out, and so now I have to go back and add them in and see what seeds I'm missing that I don't have any more of and order those. I create a list of the things that I need for the next season. Maybe it is seeds, maybe it is tools, maybe it is plants. Putting your tools away in a sheltered location that is going to be protected from the weather, that's also super important. So these are things that you want to think about when you are going through the winter, and it's going to just help you to keep going and not have those winter blues, because it's going to keep you excited about gardening and the next season and all that. Another thing you can do, and I love to do that, is planning your garden for the next season. So I love to get a drawing board or just a gardening journal. I just have a notebook and I draw my garden plans on it, and I write down any name of plants that I want on it. If I'm watching a video, or if I am looking at a catalog and I see a plant that I love, I write that down. I may not order it this next season, but it's a plant that's on my list that I really love, that I want, and I will try to imagine how that plant is going to look in that space, and see if that is the space that is really meant for it. If it's not, then I'm able to change my plans, because it's just plans that are on paper and have not come to fruition yet. And again, sharpening your tools, that's really important. Cleaning them, because these are things that we don't do during the summer season. So tell us in the comment section down below, what are your winter garden planning tips for all of us? What do you do that helps you throughout the winter to get a better gardening season the next spring, and also that helps you get along during these winter blues and encourages you for the next gardening season? Also, what is the thing that you look forward to the most in the winter? It doesn't have to be about gardening, just anything you look forward to in the winter. Type it down in the comment section down below.